One of the factors in this project is, in order to make the technical design stage as efficient as possible, what both the client and the developer and the design team wanted was to actually engage with the contractor at an earlier stage, primarily to reduce the incidence of rework and mistakes in terms of coordination, and also to get valuable input from the specialist subcontractors involved. That meant that our developer had to procure the contractor earlier than usual. So at this stage, we're going to hear from our contractor and see what processes, what information he went through in terms of submitting his bid for the work. So Steve?
Okay, thanks for all coming back. At least didn't scare you all off. Anybody make any lifetime friends in there or anything? No? Right, okay, contractor's bid. It's really important, I think, for a contractor to start getting engaged a lot earlier in a project, and there's a few reasons for that. We all know, traditionally, we get appointed at the end of sort of stage E, F1 round there, and hopefully the new plan of works has just restructured that slightly. And we all know that traditionally the design team used to draw a building services model, and that used to have a duct, a few cable trays and a pipe, as Michael showed, and then I come along and bring my subcontracting team on. And what happens? We don't install that way. Let's redraw it all again. Great. I'm paying for that. I want to stop it happening. Yeah? So by getting early engagement, I'm actually influencing the design that Michael's doing as the architect and his multidiscipline team. I can actually get my subcontractor involved directly with them people to reduce that rework, reduce waste, and reduce the duration of that project delivery. I also know that we've got a steel frame considered for the building. I've got to deliver that, so I've, again, just got to check that I can actually deliver it in the time. But more importantly, I've got to deliver this now in, it must be about 6 months, is it? I think they said 10 months a bit ago. So I've got some challenging things ahead. So one thing I'm going to do is look at introducing modular builds, off-site construction. And the reason for doing that is, one, I can take it away from site while the site is being developed. So the land can start being developed as I'm working on things away and just bring them in. Because time is so important. And if I lose time, I can't get it back. So let's see and make sure I can deliver this on time. Now, we know that we've looked at the main access routes to the site. I've got to consider now the access route on the site. Yeah? How's that material going to be delivered? Can the trucks get on, get off? How the materials are going to get off the trucks? Lay down areas? Materials, are all the materials available? Can I get them quickly? Is it going to be provided to me, etc.? And also my labour force. Have I got the right people around me that can help and support deliver this project? And I don't know whether you saw this morning on the Google image, there's actually a lake now on the proposed site. Very nice in summer. We can take our sandwiches outside and things like that. But proved to me a bit of difficulty, because what's that done for me is actually push my lay down area onto the other side of the site. Whereas traditionally I'd have brought maybe a mobile crane on site to lift my materials into place, I've now got to install a tower crane. And that's so I can lift the materials over the reach of the lake and bring it back onto the site. So I've got to consider things like this. I've got to consider, is that lay down area big enough? Because if I'm doing off-site modular construction, it's going to need a lot more space than piles of steel just thrown and stacked up. Yeah, so I've got to take all these things in consideration. But one great thing is I'm actually going to receive a design model. Yeah? I'm not receiving that pack of A3 PDFs that takes me 2 weeks to try and understand what it's all meaning. I can start walking around this model. I can start getting a good understanding of what this model means to me. How we're going to build it, what's its construction, because some of the information's already started to come in. And I can reuse it for many things, and I'm just going to show you how it's going to help me deliver my bid. But the first thing I've got to consider is the condition of that model. I don't know how good that's been actually modelled, put together, how the elements are put in. And I would do an audit, a full audit on that model as soon as I've received it. And this is even at bid stage. Because if that model has been put together in such a state that I've got to spend the first 2 weeks remodelling things, I've got to factor that into my bid. If steel columns have been drawn in there from ground floor to the roof, it's not how I am going to procure them. So it'll have an impact if I take quantities off, if I put it into scheduling that I'm going to use, etc. And you can see here I'm using a quick, simple traffic light system to go through main elements of the model. Even things like are datum points correct? Because if they're not, it might look all right in Revit, but if I pull it into other platforms, which I'm going to use, they could be splattered all over the place and wrong orientations and all sorts. So I need to consider these things. I even need to come down here and start considering the detail that's in that model and the naming conventions in that model. Because if they're all named wrong, the client specified how things should be named. I've got to rename them. Even there, you can see 5 red blobs there. That's the MEP side of things. It's telling me that I've looked at it. There's no flow rates, there's no pressure calcs, there's nothing in there. I've got to put them in because that's what the client needs and wants. So there's lots to consider, and this is so important. So any contractors, who've we got as a contractor out here? Have we got a few? Brilliant. Let's hope I'm not bidding against you, but we'll keep going. Please look at auditing these models when you receive them. Don't just receive them and expect them all to be built the same. Every model's different and been put together differently. And tools and processes like this will help you during your bid processes and taking on work, especially during the construction phase, etc. What I'm showing here now is I've just moved into Revit. Now this is free Revit. Yeah, so don't know whether you know, but there's a free viewer within Revit. Install Revit after 30 days, it moves into free viewer and the save disables. Great, but what I've got here is allowing me to look at warnings in there, look at problems in that model that I wouldn't actually see. So you can see here the staircase is actually in the floor slab. I need to factor that. Either the architect needs to go back and amend his model because I'm not taking that on, or I need to go back to the client and say, look, you're going to have to put some additional costs in the bid because the model's not in a fit state that I need. I can start creating sections through the model. I can start looking at areas of that model that I wouldn't have any detail of in the past. Things that I'm not clear of, I would be flicking through these PDFs, finding information. I can't work out what that's done. Oh, I'll just put a nominal sum in there to cover that. I can find out that information. And that's key because it's going to help me reduce my costs and improve my delivery. And at the moment, I'm just auditing the geometry and a bits of information. Now, I know the client is using something called FX360, so I've looked into that, and it'll actually strip out all the information from a model as well. So I can actually use this to audit the information behind that model. What's actually missing behind there? Not how it looks and how things have been put together, the actual information. The EIR is so specific that it's telling me what information needs to be against what elements and what needs to be against each space. And by doing tools like this, it will list out all the information that I require and show me where the gaps are. I can then go back and either cost for that, because I've got to do it now, or again go back to the architect and said, you implemented an MET, a model element table. You said you were going to fill all this information in for me. You've not done any of it. I'm not receiving this model again. Go and fill it in, and then I'll consider taking it on if I'm appointed. So don't think about models as just being geometry and auditing geometry. Look at tools that you can audit the information as well behind it. Because you've got to deliver this at the end as a contractor. And if it's not there, you've got to put that into your bid, into your cost to actually deliver it to meet that employee's information requirements that's been truly defined for you. Now, we know we've got a tight time scale. 6 months or something like that. Something like that. Now, what this is 4D construction sequencing. And what this is actually linking the construction plan, the Gantt chart, with the actual model. Now, this is probably took 3 or 4 hours or something like that to do. So it's not a long process. It's just reusing the data again. And all it is using the Gantt chart that's been produced by my planners, but traditionally, the build of that building was up here in the planner's head. Yeah, as me as a contracting manager or the client couldn't actually see and get a real good idea of how it was actually going to be built. This is doing that for them now. So this is giving true visual impact and early engagement again to the client, and that's something that we wanted. But it's given me certainty that I can actually deliver this on time, to cost, and meet the requirements. Okay, so great tool. That's Synchro, by the way. Right, one thing I do need to consider is the model. Now, I'm a contractor, so I'm not going to be using Revit. I need to federate these models together. And I'm using here something called Navisworks. Well, Navisworks will read any file format out there in the market and bring it into a platform. Now, what you can see here is what a client could see as well. He can walk around that model. He can start viewing and getting visual early impact of that model. What doesn't he agree with? What doesn't he like? We can look at how the services are sat in that void above the ceiling. We can actually drop through and start looking and walking around the virtual built model of his offices. He can start looking at decor. He can start looking at furniture layouts. And even down to the end of the office there, we've got the glass meeting room. What I don't want to happen is actually build that for him to come and walk around site and say, what's that? It's a greenhouse. I'm not having that as a meeting room. Take it down, rebuild it, blah, blah, blah. I've got to fit that cost up, and I don't want to do that. So by my client walking around and other people on the project walking around, we're finding problems virtually. We're not finding them once we've built and waste materials, etc. We're resolving it. And what we're doing here is allowing the client and allowing the whole team to actually mark up and review that information. So we're adding tags here, and this is fully auditable, so you can see who's actually made the comment. You can actually audit that, make sure it's resolved. As soon as I've done that, the architect can see that, the structural guys can see it. We can move them elements around. But more important, that client engagement's key. Other things I'm doing here is the client can actually just pick one model. And I've actually here just switched off the whole of the architect's model. So we can start seeing about the structural frame and the services within that building very, very easily. Something like that is information you would never, ever be able to see in the past. And he's actually be able to walk around that as well and see comments. But I can do that as well. So it's going to help me reduce my waste and problems, because I don't want problems on site. Yeah, I'm up on my safety. I don't want any errors on site. And more importantly, I don't want waste. The other thing that's so important to me is clash detection. Now, this is a huge impact to me because this is really going to reduce my waste. And this is a clash matrix. And what we've got here is on the horizontal columns here, you can see on your left, are all the elements in a model. And that's replicated across the top on a horizontal. Again, all the elements. And all we do is we pick one horizontal against one vertical, pull it together. There's the marker. This is clash number 1, and we'll put a tolerance on it. Now, the tolerance I'm going to start with is probably 200 mil, because I want all the big problems sorted first. I don't want to start at 3 mil, because I'll end up with thousands of clashes, and I won't be able to resolve them. So start at 200 mil. And I've actually picked ducts against columns. So they're my 2 elements. And what I'm doing here is using something called search set. So it's allowing me to find all the columns in the building. The top there columns, I'll select find all. And what it does, it just finds all them columns in that model. That's my first criteria. Against columns, I want to actually clash all the ducts. So I can do the same again. I can save this one off first as columns. Now, anybody who's used Navisworks, if you're doing this, use search sets, not selection sets. Because a search set will update as the model updates. If you use a selection set, it's rigid to the things you've just selected on that day. So you think you've got clash-free models and you forgot about the 20 new columns that have actually come in. So use search sets. So I'm doing the same again for the duct. Building that duct in, using the searches, finding them all, hiding off things that are not selected. There's all my ducts. So I've now got confidence that the model has been filtered to find just columns and ducts. So now what do I need to do is save the columns away. So you can see there, columns and ducts, we're ready to go. Now what I need to do is run Clash Detective. Now this is in Navisworks Manage. And the Clash Detective here will actually run all these scenarios. So that Clash matrix, you could start with 20, 30 different Clash protocol going and gradually build up. I've got projects going at the moment. They've got like 350 different scenarios of things clashing against each other. And you can see now what I'm doing here is picking Clash number 1, columns versus ducts, and I'm now going to pick the 2 search sets. And you can see search set number 1, there they are, columns, search set number 2, ducts. Tolerance, done, run it. Michael's done a great job, I've got 1 clash. Yeah, that'd be amazing, wouldn't it? There's the clash. Right, I can see it, I can visually see it, I can mark that up if need be. But most importantly, that can go straight back to the design team to resolve that error before I order any materials. So that's allowing me to get better cost certainty all the way through my delivery and hopefully reduce what I need to cater for and consider in my delivery and bid. Okay, so the other thing we need to consider is the quantities. Now, is there any QSs amongst you? 1. Hello. We had a few in the other one, so I kept all my jokes quite minimal. So, quantity takeoff, yeah? What's great about quantity takeoff now is I'm pulling the whole model and just stripping it straight into a workbook. And what it's actually doing is filtering everything, because everything's intelligent now. It's not lines, arcs, circles, all put on layer 0 and everything's sort of all blocked together. Things are actual objects. So it's a virtual build of this building. And it's actually filtered it into the specific naming and actually brought it over here. So you can see each wall's defined, the length of the walls in there, and it's also the total of the walls in there. Now this can be stripped straight into Excel. So all it's doing, it's not taking the role of a QS, it's just making them more accurate and have better cost certainty for myself when it comes through for costing. It's allowing me to capture that true data that's sat in that model. So traditionally, it had been a PDF, highlighter pen, scale rule, and an Excel spreadsheet. And we've counted 50 doors. I probably need to order 53 just in case they've missed a few. I don't now, because hopefully we've captured it all. The model's checked by that many people, we'd have found problems if a room was there with no door to access it and things like that. So great tool, very easy to use. But just think where it's going to. It's not going to do everything for you. Take the objects off, push it into Excel, and look at your traditional processes of estimating and bringing them costs together for delivery. What I'm showing here is, again, free Revit viewer for a contractor, which is great because I don't design author, so I don't need it. And I'm producing another schedule in Revit, and this is a material takeoff schedule. Now, the QTO in Navisworks and that is pulling out a type of wall, which is, say, a basic wall, which is brick, cavity, block, plaster, paint, skirting, but it's just called a basic wall. What this is doing is stripping it into the materials that that wall's made up of. And you can see here, it's probably quite hard to see, but it's actually broke it down into plasterboard, into some studded material, all the skirtings there listed, and we can sort that out, put a filter on it, and put grand totals in. So I'm not just looking at high-level walls now, I've actually got into the true materials that's being put in by the architect. So I've took it down granularly to that next level, and I can use that 2 different bits of software. Hopefully they both add up the same, but it'll help the QSs and things like that to get more confident in using this technology. Okay. So that's just a few of the tools that I'm going to use during my bid process to help me deliver a lower price to hopefully win this bid. But there's a few things I need to consider because I've got this EIR in place. And one thing I really need to look at, that EIR is specing that all the models need to be delivered in Revit. As we know, Revit's a great design tool, but push that into the subcontracting space, manufacturing space, it doesn't go to the detail for the manufacture and fabrication. So what happens when I've got that steelwork connection because traditionally it would have probably gone to my subcontractor and the connection plates would have been done in Tekla. I'd have gone to my MEP design team, great, done it in Revit MEP. Passes again to my subcontractor, what happens? They redo it in CAD DUT or fabrication MEP. So I've got to take into consideration how I'm going to capture all this information and how I'm going to get it back into that Revit model or capture the information in other means and other ways to fulfill the requirements of my client who wants data-rich models passed over into that FX360 CAFM system at the end. And if you look at the asset information, you can see there's a list here. That list isn't in Revit at all. That's fabrication, that's manufacturer's information. Where do I capture that? How am I going to capture it? So I just need to factor that into my costs and my bid as well, just to make sure I've got it covered, because it's me that's got to deliver that to that client at the end of the day. And it's all about data. Yeah, BIM is data-rich modelling. And there's one thing that we've not talked about all day yet, and that's COBE, Construction Operation Building Information Exchange. Why? Because we don't really need it on this project. We've got a client who's really defined his requirements. He's defined what information he needs to capture against spaces and against elements. And it's how that information is truly detailed. That's why we don't need COBE. If the client came to me and said, we want BIM, we want level 2 BIM, blah, 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 I'll have COBE because I don't know what I'm doing with it at the end. That's when COBE comes in. If you've not got a true defined delivery, you don't know what information needs to be collated, we don't know what CAFM system it's going into, COBE is a lowest form denominator, which is an Excel spreadsheet. And it strips out the information from the model and populates this Excel spreadsheet via IFC files and other formats. But there's still going to be manual input. So if I had COBE as a delivery, I need to consider that because that could influence the costing I put in on the job. But I've got a great client here who knows what he wants, so I don't need COBE. Other things in my bid I'm going to put in there that I'm going to actually use mobile media, mobile technology. And this is great, really, because I'm trying to move my whole team and my supply chain away from just using paper. I don't want to start rolling paper out on the concrete floor, getting all dust and everything else. I want to use the technology that I've already got at my fingertips and I can reuse again. And it's going to engage everybody in the project. Now, we know the client wants early engagement. He can see the information that's being collated. He can see what data I'm collating against his assets at an early stage. If he's not getting the data he requires, he can tell me and I can adjust rather than wait until the end, and I've got a huge job to collate different information that he wants. It's also going to look at my construction management team because they can see who's creating all these issues. They can see who's creating the snags on site, but actually who's not closing them out again. Who's causing all the problems? Because everything's recorded in this system and it's visual and impact to everybody. Even the project managers can start seeing what's happening. So they can get early engagement and seeing if there's things that's going to actually impact on the delivery and delay what we're actually going to push out there. And right the way through to the architect. So if there are things collated, problems, things not fitting, whatever, the architect can adjust very, very quickly the models before I get things procured or fabricated off-site. And even down to the site people. So the field system will put in a QA procedure for me, which will tell me what things need to be done as I'm doing a task. So if I'm installing a pump, I need to do these things before I commission that pump. So it's going to improve my health and safety and improve my quality on site. And that's really key because it's these guys that will be using it. Yeah, I worked on a job and actually the client used it as well, and he walked around site with the mobile technology and finding problems, and he was doing his own snagging while he was using this mobile media technology, which I thought was quite unique, but he got really involved in the project and he loved it. And it was just a key differentiator for him. So I do need to consider my supply chain. If it's broken and they don't provide me the information, I've still got to get it to the client somehow. So if I've got two bids of similar price and one people's offering me 2D PDF only, and the others are saying, well, I'll model and give you data-rich information, I'll input it into Excel for you, blah, 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 who am I going to go with? So I've just got to consider that, because there's huge risk on me delivering the project but not meeting that EIR. And that's part of my bid, so hopefully, if I'm successful after lunch, we can have a look at that, some of that technology and some of the field systems and that I'm going to implement. Now, to finish off, I spotted in that EIR 6 things, LOD 500. Anybody heard of it? Yeah? As-built verification. I have to deliver an as-built model at the end of my project to that client. Yeah? Great. Because what that means is I can't deliver my traditional drawings that I used to, because they weren't really as-built, they were for construction models, and there was a few little errors in them and things like that. I can't do that anymore. They want as-built models. And this image is really just an example. So you can see the beam here. That's the beam in the model. I've actually laser scanned it, point cloud scanned it. And are the guys from Plowman Craven around? Yeah, 2 guys there. If you want to know about this stuff, go and have a word with these guys at lunch. Great guys, and tell you all about this. But the point cloud is capturing that area. Yeah? And the beam is actually there. So I now need some form of process put in place to amend the model to move the beam into its correct location. That's when it becomes LOD 500 and true as built. Because what I don't want is the client to grab the model when he gets the old brown patch on his ceiling and say, oh, there's a duct above there. So he goes and orders some parts, and when he actually drops his ceiling tiles, it's a pipe. And he's ordered the wrong things. So that's why they want it as built. They need to know what's where in the right place so they can manage their buildings better at handover. So just be aware, anybody looking at LOD 500 delivery, that needs to be considered. So hopefully I've just shown you a few things that I've looked at in my bid and looked at some of the technology that's helped me. And the way it's helped me is because I've been able to receive this data right the way through and passed over to me at this early stage. So hopefully after lunch I'll be successful and I can take you further on the journey and show you some of the field technology and some of the good stuff we're using in there. So hopefully see you all later.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, just a couple of points very, very quickly. Certainly for the architects and design teams in the audience, I guess there's a health warning there. If you're going to be working on a project where the contractor is going to audit the model in the same way that Steve has done, then you need to be very confident that you've got some very robust audit and verification processes in place to make sure that the model you're going to hand over is going to be fit for purpose. Because certainly I can imagine your client is not going to be best pleased if it turns out not to be the case. We're going to break for lunch now, but I won't keep you in suspense. Steve is going to win the bid. You knew that, didn't you? 2 factors. Contingency was massively down on his competitors because of the work he'd undertaken and the confidence he was able to demonstrate through his QTO and clash detection, etc. And the second point, as we've seen from the client, he likes to be involved. And Steve, with his visualization tools in Synchro and Navisworks, has demonstrated to the client that it's perfectly feasible for that client to be involved at the next stage.